so glad to be here. This is my dream, to go to an event that I could walk to. So my husband and I and my dog Sparky, who is working the room, just walked over here, and I'm so appreciative to MBA for hosting us tonight. And this is a sort of a strange moment, because tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I have a signing event at Hudson Booksellers in the Nashville airport, and it goes from there. And I will be on the road for the next 6 weeks. And if you go to annpatchett.com, you can find out where I will be. So if you have relatives that you could send to come and see me, that would be really great. I'm always just terrified when I go out on book tour. And people always think that that's because that I'm afraid that I'm going to get bad reviews, or I'm afraid that nobody's going to come to the event. So when I say to people I'm terrified, they comfort me and they say, no, the book is good. People are really going to like it. That actually isn't what I'm terrified of. And I'm not afraid of public speaking. I just can't stand the idea of leaving home for 6 weeks and being on an airplane every single day and sleeping in a hotel every night, because they put so much bleach in the sheets and the towels, which you just don't notice if you're in a hotel for 2 or 3 or 4 nights, but try it sometime for 6 weeks. Like your skin actually starts to fall off. So this is really like my bon voyage, and I feel like I'm going off to China on a small raft. And I'm really, really happy that I get to see so many of my friends and my neighbors and my family before I go. Parnassus Books closed early today, so everybody could come. And I can't tell you what an enormous source of joy and love that store has been in my life, and how much I care for everyone who works there and everyone who comes in and shops there. So I thank all of you for supporting this crazy dream that Karen Hayes and I cooked up about 5 years ago. And one of the things that I always do when I'm on book tour, see, this is like I'm trying all of this stuff out on you guys tonight. If the reading bombs tomorrow night in Brooklyn, I'll just read something else. But every time I go on book tour now, I sell a book. So it's like my David Sedaris thing. So the book that I am selling this year is Dogs as I See Them. And it's a book that was written, or I should say drawn, by Lucy Dawson in England in the late 1930s. And it's been out of print since the 50s. And I know this fantastic editor at HarperCollins named Liz Sullivan, who's been trying to get this thing put back into print for 7 years. And nobody was interested in doing it. And so she asked me if I would write the introduction, and then they put it back into print. And there's a companion book that's coming out in a few months called Dogs Rough and Smooth, and Susan Orlean, who wrote The Orchid Thief, did the intro for that. Great Christmas present, great housewarming gift. I always like to encourage people maybe to think about not drinking quite so much, so the next time you go to a dinner party, instead of taking a bottle of wine, you could take someone a nice copy of Dogs as I See Them. And we have them here tonight, and we have them at Parnassus, but be sure to pick it up and flip through it, because everyone who has a dog or loves a dog would love this book. It's really an amazing book. What this woman did for a living is had dogs come to her house and then sat for little dog portraits. And she, did the Queen's corgis and that kind of thing. Okay, so Commonwealth. Let's see. 18 years ago, I was living at the Helena Court Apartments on Belmead Boulevard, because it was the only rental property that I could find, where I met my friend Donna Nicely. We were across the hall neighbors. It was the only apartment that I could find that took dogs. And when I was at the Helena Court apartment, there was a woman I loved very much who lived downstairs, whose name was Jean Perrier. And Jean Perrier said to one of the other women who lived in this building, because it was only women, I think there was like a rule or something. We were like an aging sorority house. And Jean Perrier, who was in her 80s at the time, said to someone else, about my first book, Patron Saint of Liars, which she read when I moved in, if you ask me, that girl seems to know a little bit too much about homes for unwed mothers. And it was a real wake-up moment, because my goal as a novelist has always been to write books that will not in any way disturb my family. I really wanted to write fiction for a whole host of reasons, where you could read my book and at the end you wouldn't know anything more about anyone else in my life. And in fact, I knew lots of people who wrote what we call roman à clefs, the thinly veiled autobiographical novel, and I really looked down on them. I mean, and I kept it inside, it was private, but I really thought that the honorable thing to do was to write fiction from a place of great imagination and not tap your own life experiences. But this is what happened to me in my life, and this is my 7th novel and my 10th book. I really think I'm writing different books. And people are always saying to me, oh, you write it's like your books have been written by different people. They're so different. But in fact, they are exactly the same book, over and over again. A group of strangers are thrown together by circumstance and form a society. It is The Magic Mountain. It is Lord of the Flies. It is The Poseidon Adventure. 3 things that had a big influence on my life. And I never am trying to do this, and in fact, I'm trying very hard not to do this. But whenever I finish a book and get to the end, if it's State of Wonder and our heroine has landed in the Amazon in a tribe she doesn't understand, if it's Bel Canto, a group of people who've come to a party are taken over by hostages, and it's always 2 very disparate groups of people who are stuck together in some isolated place for a long period of time. Even in Magician's Assistant, it's the sort of glamorous girl from LA stuck with the people in Nebraska in a snowstorm. So what to do? I think that I'm probably going to have to write this book for the rest of my life. Well, then I wrote a book called This is the Story of a Happy Marriage, thanks to Nikki Kaufman. Where is Nikki? Are you still here? She's back there. Oh, okay. So when Nikki first moved back to Nashville, she worked for a couple of weeks as my assistant. And what she accomplished in that time was she made the decision that I was going to write a book of essays. And she went through all of my essays, and she told me what essays were missing and what I still needed to write. And she asked me to write a long piece about my marriage. She said something that was very kind and now completely outdated. She said, you and Carl are the only really happily married couple that I know. And now, of course, she is part of a happily married couple herself, because she's all grown up. And she said, I want you to write an instructive essay to tell me how I can have a happy marriage. And what I realized when I started to write that essay was that it was the long and extensive history of divorce in my family. And that was how I got to my own happy marriage. And when I was writing that essay, it was the most terrifying thing I had ever written in my life, because I felt like I was breaking this sacred trust, and I was writing about something very, very personal in my family. And for anyone in here who is interested in writing, this is actually a really important piece of advice, which was at every moment when I was writing that essay and feeling really sick and terrified about it, I just kept saying to myself, just keep writing it. You are the only person in the world who has to read this essay. Write it, finish it, put it aside, and then make a decision about what you want to do with it. And so I did that. And when I finished, I thought it was a huge betrayal of my family and my history and everyone I loved, and that everyone would hate me. And I showed it to the principal people in my life, and everybody said, seriously? That's the best you got? That's what you think is going to rock our world? And it was a real epiphany that I could, in fact, write about my family, and no one in my family actually cared. And more importantly, that the people in my family were really happy for me, and they were really supportive of me. A whole bunch of other things came into play after that figured into my ultimately writing Commonwealth. One was I read the Patrick Melrose novels by Edward St. Albans, which I highly recommend, and I knew them to be very autobiographically grounded, fiction, and I knew I didn't care at all what had happened in this man's life. I only cared about what brilliant books these were. Another thing that happened, I read an essay in a Jonathan Franzen book of essays called Farther Away, and it was about the fact that every time an author writes a book, he or she has to do the thing that is the most frightening to them. And he said the most frightening thing I could possibly think about would be to write about my family. And I thought, you know, all my life I've been congratulating myself because I've been writing about Peru. And in fact, he was right. It did seem so much scarier to write something that was not about my family, but was set closer to home and that everybody would sort of look at me askance. The third thing that happened was I turned 50. And Barbara Kingsolver had told me when I was 48, it was right before I started this book, she said, you know, once you turn 50, you don't care anymore. You just absolutely don't care what anybody thinks about what you're doing. Show of hands, has anybody else found this to be true? I mean, it's really like I drank the Kool-Aid or something. I have been walking around all this time going, I just don't want to upset you. I don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't want to bother you. I don't want to take up too much space. And then I woke up on my 50th birthday and was like, yeah, whatever. So it's very important to me at this point in my life to be able to claim the entire landscape of my life. And even the parts that overlap with the lives of people that I love, that I can feel that I can go anywhere. And it's so interesting because I've always believed that as a fiction writer. I have always believed that I am entitled to write about people of other races, other religions, other genders, other nationalities, what I can go anywhere. No one is allowed to say to me that my imagination there's a limit, you know, that there's a fence and I'm not allowed to go here. You are allowed to say I did a bad job. You are allowed to be offended by it, but nobody is allowed to tell anyone where their imagination may or may not go. And yet that is exactly what I've been doing with myself my whole life. I've been saying my imagination can't go here in this place that is in fact closest to me. And of course the funny thing is, this is exactly the same book that I'm always writing, except in the past, I spent a whole lot of energy making extravagant papier-mâché costumes for my characters so that nobody would read Bel Canto and think that it was a book about my childhood. And that to stop doing that, and just to say, instead of, like I have a certain amount of energy for a book, right? And instead of using that energy, or some of that energy, on costuming and scenery, I'm going to put all of the energy into the story and just tell the story. I talked to my family about this while I was working on the book. I mean, that said, it's actually not so autobiographical, but I talked to my family while I was working on it. When I finished it, I went to Kinko's, I made everybody a copy, I sent it out to everybody, and it was really funny because the first thing I do when I finish a book is I read it out loud to Jane Hamilton. And she reads her books out loud to me. And she had just written one of my favorite books all year, and certainly my favorite book of Jane Hamilton's. It's called The Excellent Lombards. And it is her very autobiographical novel, which she had been trying to write for 20 years. We call it the farm novel. But she had not told anyone in her family, including her children, that she was doing this. And so the book was published, and Jane was, you know, in the bathroom throwing up because she realized that she neglected to tell anybody in her family that she had written a book about them. So when I finished reading Commonwealth out loud to her, she said, "What are you going to do with your family?" And I said, "Well, I've sent them all copies." And she said, Why? On what possible planet would you think that that was a good idea?" And yet it really has been a good idea. And I read the third pass pages of this book, because when you finish a book, they make you read it until you loathe it, until you despise it in the deepest center of yourself. And Carl and I were on a ship in Norway when I was reading it the third time, and I could read about 2 pages at a time and then fall asleep. But by the time I got that far in the reading, what I realized is it wasn't about us. And it was really great. My mom is rereading it right now, and she said to me this morning, I'm halfway through the book, it isn't about us. It seemed like it was about us the last time. So, there it is. I don't know if that's like the lady doth protest too much, or just interesting patter before a reading. So I'm going to read just the very beginning of the book, and that way I don't have to set it up at all. The christening party took a turn when Albert Cousins arrived with gin. Fix was smiling when he opened the door, and he kept smiling as he struggled to make the connection. It was Albert Cousins from the district attorney's office standing on the cement slab of his front porch. He'd opened the door 20 times in the last half hour to neighbors and friends and people from church and Beverly's sister and all of his brothers and their parents and practically an entire precinct worth of cops, but Cousins was the only surprise. Fix had asked his wife 2 weeks ago why she thought they had to invite every single person they knew in the world to a christening party, and she'd handed over the guest list and asked him who he thought they should cut. He hadn't had an answer at the time, but if she were standing at the door now, he would have pointed straight ahead and said, him. Not that he disliked Albert Cousins. He didn't know him other than to be able to put his name together with his face, but not knowing him was the reason to not invite him. Fix thought that maybe Cousins had come to the house to talk about a case. Nothing like that had ever happened before, but what else could be the explanation? Guests were milling around in the front yard, and whether they were coming late or leaving early, or just taking refuge outside because the house was packed beyond what any fire marshal would allow, Fix couldn't say. What he was sure of was that Cousins was there uninvited, alone with a bottle in a bag. Fix, Albert Cousins said. The tall deputy DA in a suit and tie put out his hand. Al, Fix said. Did people call him Al? Glad you made it. He gave his hand 2 hard pumps and let it go. I'm cutting it close, Al Cousins said, looking at the crowd inside as if there might not be room for him. The party was clearly past its midpoint. Most of the small triangular sandwiches were gone, half of the cookies. The tablecloth beneath the punch bowl was pink and damp. Fix stepped aside to let him in. You're here now, he said. Wouldn't have missed it, though. Of course, he had missed it. He hadn't been at the christening. Dick Spencer was the only one from the DA's office Fix had invited. Dick had been a cop himself. He had gone to law school at night, pulled himself up without ever making any of the other guys feel like he was better for it. It didn't matter that Dick was driving a black and white or standing in front of a judge. There was no doubt where he came from. Cousins, on the other hand, was a lawyer like all the others, DAs, PDs, hired guns, friendly enough when they needed something, but unlikely to invite an officer along for a drink. And if they did, it was only because the cop was holding out on them. And the DAs were the guys who smoked your cigarettes because they were trying to quit. The cops, who filled up the living room and the dining room and spilled out into the backyard beneath the clothesline and the 2 orange trees, they weren't trying to quit. They drank iced tea mixed with lemonade and smoked like stevedores. Albert Cousins handed over the bag and Fix looked inside. It was a bottle of gin, a big one. Other people had brought prayer cards and mother-of-pearl rosary beads or a pocket-sized Bible covered in white kid with gilt-edged pages. 5 of the guys, or 5 of their wives, had kicked in together and bought a blue enameled cross on a chain with a tiny little pearl in the center. Very pretty, something for later on. So, this makes a boy and a girl? 2 girls. Cousin shrugged. What can you do? Not a thing, Fix said, and closed the door. Beverly had told him to leave it open so that they could get some air, which just went to show how much she knew about man's inhumanity to man. It didn't matter how many people were in your house, you did not leave the goddamn front door open. Beverly leaned out of the kitchen. There were easily 30 people standing between them, the entire Malloy clan, all the DiMattios, a handful of altar boys plowing through what was left of the cookies. But there was no missing Beverly, that yellow dress. Fix, she said, raising her voice over the din. And it was Cousins who turned his head first, and Cousins gave her a nod. By reflex, Fix stood straighter, but he let the moment pass. Make yourself at home, he said to the deputy district attorney, and pointed out a cluster of detectives by the sliding glass door, their jackets still on. You know plenty of people here. Maybe that was true, maybe it wasn't. He sure as hell didn't know the host. Fix turned to cut his way through the crowd, and the crowd parted for him, touching his shoulder, shaking his hand, saying congratulations. He tried not to step on any of the kids, his 4-year-old daughter Caroline among them. They were playing some sort of game on the dining room floor, crouching and crawling like tigers between the feet of adults. The kitchen was packed with wives, all of them laughing and talking too loud, none of them being helpful except for Lois from next door, who was pulling bowls out of the refrigerator. Beverly's best friend Wallace was using the side of the bright chrome toaster to reapply her lipstick. Wallace was too thin and too tan, and when she straightened up, she had too much lipstick on. Beverly's mother was sitting at the breakfast table with the baby in her lap. They had changed her from the lacy white christening gown into the starched white dress with yellow flowers embroidered around the neck, as if she were a bride who had slipped away into her going-away dress at the end of the reception. The women at the kitchen took turns making a fuss over the baby, acting like it was their job to keep her entertained until the Magi arrived. But the baby wasn't entertained. Her blue eyes were glazed over. She was staring into the middle distance, tired of everything. All this rush to make sandwiches and take in presents for a girl who was not yet a year old. Look how pretty she is, the mother-in-law said to no one, running the back of one finger across the baby's rounded cheek. Ice, Beverly said to her husband. We're out of ice. That was your sister's assignment, Fix said. Then she failed. Can you go ask one of the guys to go get some? It's hot, and it's too hot to have a party without ice. She had tied an apron behind her neck, but not around her waist. She was trying not to wrinkle her dress. Strands of yellow hair had come loose from her French twist and were falling into her eyes. If she didn't bring the ice, then she might as well come in here and help you make sandwiches. Fix was looking right at Wallace when he said this, but Wallace capped her lipstick and ignored him. He had meant it to be helpful because clearly Beverly had her hands full. To look at her, anyone would think that she was the sort of person who would have her parties catered, someone who would sit on the couch while other people passed the trays. Bonnie's so happy to see all these cops in one room, she can't be expected to think about sandwiches, Beverly said. And then she stopped the assemblage of cream cheese and cucumbers for a moment and looked down at his hand. What's in the bag? Fix smiled and held up the gin, and his wife, surprised, delivered the very first smile she had given him all day, maybe all week. Whoever you send to the store, Wallace said, displaying a sudden interest in the conversation, tell them to get the tonic. I'm not finished yet, but I just want to point this next sentence out because it is my favorite sentence in the book. You ready? Fix said he would buy the ice himself. Okay, only 4 of you got it. There was Lauren Bardwell? You got it. Okay. There was a market up the street, and he wasn't opposed to slipping out for a minute. The relative quiet of the neighborhood, the order of the bungalows with their tight green lawns, the slender shadows palm trees cast, and the smell of the orange blossoms, all combined with the cigarette he was smoking to have a settling effect on him. His brother Tom came along, and they walked together in companionable silence. Tom and Betty had 3 kids now, all girls, and they lived in Escondido, where he worked for the fire department. Fix was starting to see that this is the way life worked once you got older and the kids came. There wasn't as much time as you thought there was going to be. The brothers hadn't seen each other since they all met up at their parents' house and gone to Mass on Christmas Eve. And before that, it was probably when they'd driven down to Escondido for Aaron's christening. A red Sunbeam convertible went by, and Tom said, "That one." And Fix nodded, sorry he hadn't seen it first. Now he had to wait for something he wanted to come along. At the market, they bought 4 bags of ice and 4 bottles of tonic. The kid at the register asked if they needed any limes, and Fix shook his head. It was Los Angeles in June. You couldn't give a lime away. Fix hadn't checked his watch when they left for the market, but he was a good judge of time. Most cops are. They'd been gone 20 minutes, 25 tops. It wasn't long enough for everything to change, but when they came back, the front door was standing open and there was no one left in the yard. Tom didn't notice the difference, but then a fireman wouldn't. If the place didn't smell like smoke, he went right in. There were still plenty of people in the house, but it was quieter now. Fix had turned on the radio before the party started, and for the first time he could hear a few notes of music. The kids weren't crawling in the dining room anymore, and no one seemed to notice they were gone. All the attention was focused on the open kitchen door, which was where the 2 Keating brothers were headed with the ice. Fix's partner, Lomer, was waiting for them, and Lomer cut his eyes in the direction of the crowd. "You got here just in time," he said. As tight as it had been in the kitchen before they left, there were 3 times as many people crammed in there now, and most of them were men. Beverly's mother was nowhere in sight, and neither was the baby. Beverly was standing at the sink, a butcher knife in her hand. She was slicing oranges from an enormous pile that was sliding across the counter, while 2 lawyers from the LA County District Attorney's Office, Dick Spencer and Albert Cousins, were twisting the halves of oranges on 2 metal juicers. Their foreheads were flushed and damp with sweat. Their open collars were just beginning to darken. They worked as if the safety of their city relied on the making of orange juice. Beverly's sister Bonnie, ready now to be helpful, plucked Dick Spencer's glasses from his face and wiped them with a dish towel, even though Dick had a capable wife somewhere in the crush. That was when Dick, his eyes relieved from the scrim of sweat, saw Fix and Tom and called out for ice. "Ice!" Bonnie cried, because it was true, it was hot as hell, and ice sounded better than anything. She dropped her towel to lift 2 bags from Tom, placing them in the sink atop the neat orange cups of empty rinds. Then she took the bags from Fix. Ice was her responsibility. Beverly stopped slicing. "Perfect timing," she said, and dug a paper cup into the open plastic bag, knocking out 3 modest cubes as if she knew to pace herself. It was a short drink, half gin, half orange juice from a full pitcher. She made another and another and another as the cups were passed through the kitchen and out the door and into the waiting hands of the guests. "I got tonic," Fix said, looking at the 1 bag still in his hands. He wasn't objecting to anything other than the feeling that he and his brother had somehow been left behind in the time that it had taken them to walk to the market and back. "Orange juice is better," Albert Cousins said, stopping just long enough to down the drink that Bonnie had made for him. Bonnie, so recently enamored of cops, had shifted her allegiance to the 2 district attorneys. "For vodka," Fix said. Screwdrivers, everybody knew that. But Cousins tilted his head toward the disbeliever, and there was Beverly, handing her husband a drink. For all the world, it seemed like she and Cousins had a code worked out between them. Fix held the cup in his hand and stared at the uninvited guest. He had 3 brothers in the house, an unknown number of able-bodied men from the Los Angeles Police Department, a priest who organized Saturday boxing leagues for troubled boys, all of whom would back him up in the removal of a single deputy district attorney. "Cheers," Beverly said in a low voice, not as a toast, but as a directive, and Fix, still thinking there was a complaint to be made, turned up his paper cup. So, that's where we start. Thank you. Thanks. You have to clap again at the end, so I always like people to pace themselves. Are there any questions about me, my family, my bookstore, about what you should be reading? You really have to come to see Colson Whitehead, especially. I love that book so passionately, and I'm so excited about all of the good things that have happened to it. But also, Amor Towles is coming, A Gentleman in Moscow, which is terrific. Jonathan Safran Foer, which I haven't read yet, but it's very big. And I've loved his other books, which were smaller. Or I can just tell you what to read. Or we can go home, or tell us what to read. Well, read those. Read Dickens. Read David Copperfield if you haven't read it yet. This has been an amazing year. I have to say, last year was a little lame, especially for fiction. And it's funny because as a bookseller, I'm very aware of that. What's the big book? This year started off the first week of January with 2 of my favorite books that were published this year. My Name is Lucy Barton by Elizabeth Strout, which I adored, and also When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. And I went out to Aspen this summer. Have you guys read When Breath Becomes Air? A lot of you have, yeah. It's so good. And if those of you who haven't read it or may think you don't want to read it because it seems awfully sad, it is awfully sad. It's awfully sad. And it will make you a much better person, and it will make you appreciate your life. So buck up and read the book. It's written by a man named Paul Kalanithi, who at 36, while he was finishing his residency in neurosurgery at Stanford, found out he had stage 4 lung cancer, and he wrote this book as he was dying. And I went out to Aspen this summer, and I interviewed his wife, Lucy, on stage at the Aspen Institute. It was astonishing. The perks of my job are unbelievable, namely that I can bring my dog with me everywhere and nobody gives me any grief. Anyway, going forward, Jane Hamilton's The Excellent Lombard, Louise Erdrich's La Rose. It was a great year for nonfiction as well. And by the way, for those of you who are madly typing this into your phones, I write a blog. I hate that word so much. Every month at Musing, our fantastic online literary magazine that the genius Mary Laura Philpott puts together for us. Yeah! Let's hear it from Mary Laura and those penguins, man. And so anything that I have read and I liked is on there. Don't panic. Lab Girl by Hope Jaron. If you're interested at all in science, even if you're not interested in science, but you're just interested in a really, really well-written, fascinating book. I think I said La Rose by Louise Erdrich, but then I skipped over it. It's my favorite Louise Erdrich book, which is really saying something. And you know how I say that everybody writes the same book over and over again? Louise's map is something unspeakable happens in the first 8 pages. And then either it gets better or worse. But everybody deals for the rest of the book with the unspeakable thing that happens in the first 8 pages. But I loved this book. Another book that I read recently that I thought was fantastic was called In the Darkroom by Susan Faludi. Incredible. Susan Faludi wrote Backlash. She's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. She is, after Gloria Steinem, probably America's foremost feminist, and she had this mean bully of a father, And after her parents got divorced when she was in high school, she and her father fell out of touch, and she really hadn't heard from him in 25 years. He moved back to Budapest, where he was from, and then she gets an email from him saying, just wanted to catch up. By the way, my name is Stephanie now, and I thought maybe you would like to write a book about me. And she goes to Hungary, and her father transgendered at 75. And it's not even really about that, and now wants to be her best girlfriend. It is about the Holocaust. It is about the Hungarian Jews. It is a history lesson that you just can't believe. And I'm always so impressed. I call this the Hamilton principle. When somebody can take a story that we all think we know, when you just think, I just don't have another Holocaust book in me, and somebody can retell and take a slant on this story and teach me so many things I didn't know and make it all new and fresh again, which is what Hamilton did. And it's a really, really amazing book. Jackie Woodson was here this week, another Brooklyn, also fantastic and very short. I like to balance out the very short novels with the giant novels. And if you haven't read Brown Girl Dreaming, which was Jackie's last book, and it is supposedly a middle school reader, and the first person I bought it for was my 94-year-old mother-in-law, and I think I've bought 20 copies of that book. Every single person I know wants to read that book and loves it when I give it to them. And then, of course, there is always Dogs as I See Them, which you guys are all gonna buy and really love. Yes? Will I what? If I have, will I? Because yes, I have. Will I what? Have I read the Neapolitan novels by Elena Ferrante? Yes. 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 And you know, who was the first person to tell me? I think Jane Hamilton, Miley Malloy. I mean, so many people told me to read those books. And my problem is, I am not very good anymore at reading books that are already out. I read books that are 4 months away from coming out. And also to start on a 4-book series that's massive, I just kept thinking, oh, I'm never gonna get to it. And I picked up the first book a couple of times and I put it down, and it was like the book that was always in my suitcase that I never got to. And when I finally started it, I read all 4 of those books in like 10 days. I didn't do anything else. I went down the Elena Ferrante rabbit hole, and there was nothing else in the world for me. And it's so interesting because I won't say those are my favorite books, although they would be very, very high up there. They're not in the top 10, but it was the most profound reading experience I've ever had. It was the most profound relationship with a book I have ever had reading those Elena Ferrante books. And I want to say, if you read the first half of My Brilliant Friend and you don't like it, quit. Quit. It's not going to get better for you. So I have talked to people who read the first one, who hated it, who were left cold by it, who just said I didn't connect. That's fine. Don't go on. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. For me, it just got better and better. And I almost didn't know what to do when they were over. And I kept buying sets of 4 of them. My mom read them. I mean, my mother was like, where's the next one? And I keep saying, you've got to buy the first 2 together, because if you finish the first one at 1 o'clock in the morning, you've got to have the second one right away. Every one I finished, I would read at least 20 pages of the next one. And I felt that way, again, about the Patrick Melrose novels as well. And they have a similar sort of electricity and roughness. Did you read those? The Patrick Melrose? Oh, you have such a horrifying, disgusting treat in store for you. That is such an amazing reading experience. When Jonathan Franzen was here, somebody said to him, it was an audience question, If you could recommend one book and one author, who would it be? And he, in that very Franzenish way, but he said, if I had to only recommend one book, it would be the same book I would recommend, Independent People. Yeah. So it was given to me by my friend Bjarke Olufsen. We were out to dinner one night, and he said, so, I always refer to this as the Jeopardy question from hell. Who are some of your favorite Icelandic authors? And he sent me a copy of Independent People, and which, with all respect to Karen's choice to name the bookstore Parnassus, I wanted to name it Independent People after the Haldor Laxness novel. That really is my favorite book. And you want to talk about a book that if you don't like that book by page 30, it's really not going to get better. I mean, people either hate that book or love that book. And Franzen said if I had to pick just one author, it would be Elena Ferrante. So, who knew? Yes. When I was in Chautauqua this summer, I talked on stage with Roger Rosenblatt about process, and did I use the same process to write this book that I did with previous books? I did. I mean, insofar as I put a whole book together before I start, and I know exactly where it's going and who the players are and what order things will happen. And it was a little easier, for obvious reasons, for me to put this together because I had a clearer structure in mind. I would say this book was a little easier to write than most of my books, but it was this, or maybe I'm just getting older and better. Yes. Okay, the question is on my Parnassus Instagram account, which of course has nothing at all to do with me and I've never actually seen. Because again, Mary Laura Philpott, yay! I don't have any relationship to social media. And it was about, I had done the Read Harder challenge. What was it? From Book Riot, thank you very much. And it was because I was signing 1,800 books at Ingram Warehouse last week, and Gail Vanette was reading the questions to me over on her phone. And in some ways I cheated. It's fabulous, and I highly recommend you do this. Gail was doing it with her whole family, and it's a list of about 20 or 25 maybe book topics, like read an entire book out loud to someone else, read a book over 500 pages, read a book that was written the decade you were born, read a book under 100 pages, read a book by an East Asian, read the first book in a series that was written by a person of color. I mean, just very, very specific questions that read a horror novel, make you go out in a lot of different directions. I cheated, because you're supposed to read all of those books in a calendar year, and while I had done most and felt so good that I had read the Susan Faludi book, since one of the questions was read a book either by or about a transgendered person, I was like, yes. So you're supposed to read them all in 1 year, and I obviously was filling it out for a blog post, so I cheated and used some books that I had already read. But what was interesting to me about that experience is that's reading harder is exactly what owning a bookstore makes you do, or working in a bookstore, because I am constantly reading books that 5 years ago you could not have paid me to read. Because I read Henry James over and over again. I read maybe a half a dozen new books a year. And now I'm really lucky if I read one classic a year. And it's very exciting to me to have, at this point in my life, this giant shift in my reading, and to take a test like that, and anything that makes us go in different directions. My favorite example of that is when we're picking books for our first editions club, which you guys should also all check out. It's like Fruit of the Month Club, only it doesn't rot. We pick out a signed first edition every month and mail it to you. And so there's a whole team of us who are constantly reading books that are going to be out in a few months. And it was my turn to read, and I had to read Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And I was like, post-apocalyptic fiction? would never, ever. And I had to read it, and I did, and again, just one of the best books that I read last year or the year before, whenever it came out, and a book that we just sell and sell and sell because we all feel so passionately about it. And that's a book that completely would have passed me by if I hadn't been working in a bookstore or been taking a test like that. Yes. Do I reread books? Almost never. Because life is short and I'm a good reader and I can usually catch it the first time. When I say I reread Henry James, I mean I reread The Awkward Age. It was really hard. I mean, the only things that I would be interested in reading were either things that were very hard or things at very different points in my life. I read Anna Karenina when I was 21, and I loved Anna and Vronsky. And all of the stuff about Kitty and Levin and the peasants just bored my socks off. I read it again when I was 50. I despised Anna and Vronsky. I thought Karenin was the hero of the story. They were so self-important and boring and childish, and I loved Kitty and Levin and the peasants. So, I mean, there are very, very few books that really can show you something at different times in your life and you want to spend that time with them. I recently reread the 4 Rabbit novels by John Updike, and that was a very important thing, and I didn't even know why I was doing it, but it was really my subconscious taking care of me, because my father was dying, and my father had been dying for years, and I was reading Rabbit at Rest with my sister on the plane going out to catch my father before he died. I read the last sentence of the 4th Rabbit Angstrom book, no spoiler here. It is called Rabbit at Rest. He dies in the end. I closed the book. I said to my sister, I finished the Rabbit novels. I picked up my phone, I turned it on, and Carl called and said, your dad's died. And I thought, this is why I've been doing this. I mean, I've been using Updike to get ready for this moment. So there are things, I reread Our Town all the time. I mean, there are things that are just sort of a touchstone for me that I have to go back to all the time. Yes. Do I think that the success of Parnassus has spilled over to other independent bookstores? I think other independent bookstores are successful right now, and we are all on the rise, and it is a wave. All ships rise. Yeah. I don't think that Parnassus is responsible for that. I think that we've done a great job raising awareness. This is the very weird thing about being Ann Patchett, which, you know, when I speak about myself in the third person, I can do this thing that other booksellers can't do. It would be very rude if other booksellers did. But for some reason, when I do it, people think it's charming, and it's this. If you want to use Amazon, that is absolutely okay with me. I care that you read, not how you read. But if you want to use Amazon and you want to order your books online, then you are not allowed to come into our store and talk to our smart staff who's reading the books and pick it up and smell it and read the flap copy and come to our author events and come bring your children in for story time and hang out when you've got 30 minutes to kill before picking your kids up at school, and then go home and buy your books off of Amazon. And that applies to not buying your flowers at Home Depot after talking to the people at Flower Mart for an hour about pesticides. You know, we just forget. So for some reason, it's my job to just keep putting that out there. This is for everything. If there are things you like in your community, it is your responsibility to keep those things alive. If you don't like them, great, don't use them. Let them die a natural death. Thus is the way of retail. But if you like them and you use them, then it is on you. And boy, do I feel like Nashville gets that. Boy, do I feel like you guys have been so great to us and so supportive. And I don't feel like this is a problem. But I was in Turn Row Books in Greenwood, Mississippi, the poorest little town in the Delta, and such a lovely bookstore that is holding on by its fingernails. And the owner was saying people come in every day with their phones and take pictures. I mean, like, pull the book out and take the picture and say, oh, I'm going to go home and get this off of Amazon. I can get it for $3 cheaper off of Amazon. Really, I would hunt you down and kill you. So, yes. Score. For the Pulitzer? Oh, National Book Award. You know, my money is on Colson for everything. That is such an important book, and I have been reading him since The Intuitionist. If you guys haven't read The Intuitionist, oh my God, that is such an amazing book, especially any of you who like Station 11. It's sort of a weird futuristic book about elevator inspectors. But it's very exciting when it's somebody, I know him, I don't know him super well, but I know him a little bit, and he's a good guy, and he's been in the game a long time. He's written a zombie novel, he's written about poker, he's written about elevator inspectors, he's written about John Henry. I mean, he really has a very, very wide canvas, and he's good every time. And to see this book come out, and just how beautiful and hard and smart it is, and another book that really fits in the Hamilton principle of making me as a reader wake up and say, okay, yeah, I'm ready to read another book about slavery. I didn't think I was ready to read another book about slavery, but this book tells it in a way that keeps my eyes wide open and with it. So that's where I'm at. Colson all the way. Yes, and then yeah. Hang on, because I'll forget. Let me just do that. So I said on NPR that Commonwealth is a book that I should have written when I was 25, because that's when people write their autobiographical first novel. But the nice thing about writing it the way that I did is that now I know I can write an imaginative novel, and I don't feel like I'm flat out of things. You know, if I had written this book first, I would think, oh, well, that was it. Nothing left. But I know now that I can do a lot of different things. Second half? How many manuscripts? I don't do that. I don't scrap manuscripts. Because I do it all in my head, I scrap ideas. I mean, I've come up with loads of ideas that have gone nowhere, but I don't write a book and throw it away. I have 2 friends who do that. It just looks brutal. I am now turning my face to Nikki Kaufman. How are we doing, Nikki? We had 2 more? Okay, Nikki, yes. I will be at Southern Festival of Books, and when I am at Southern Festival of Books, I'm going to be with 2 people that I'm very excited about. One of my best friends, Beverly Lowry, who writes true crime. And she wrote a book called Who Killed These Girls? How Beverly Lowry does this, I will never know. She is a brilliant writer, and it was about the girls who were killed in the yogurt shop in Austin, Texas in 1980, and the people who were put in prison were all exonerated, so who in fact killed them? And I will be in conversation with her, and I really urge you guys to come to that. Again, true crime, top of my list of things that I don't like, but Beverly is a brilliant, brilliant thinker and researcher, and her books are fantastic. And then I will be in conversation with Adam Hazlitt, who wrote Imagine Me Gone, which was another book this year that I absolutely loved. And I don't know him, and I'm so excited. I'm such a fan of his. And I got his email, and I emailed him the other night, and I said, do you want to read? Should we both read, or should we just talk? And then I said, you know what, this is like the busiest time and the busiest day, and the only time I am going to be able to be with you is the hour we are on stage. And I don't want to read, I just want to talk to you, because I'm never going to get to talk to you otherwise. And he wrote me back and he said, I am so sick of reading. we'll just talk. So those are the two things. And that reminds me, the other thing I'm going to be doing at Southern Festival right after that event is introducing, I'm so glad I remembered this, Matthew Desmond, who wrote my other favorite book. And if you want to know what book and the Pulitzer in nonfiction this year is going to be anybody's guess, Evicted by Matthew Desmond. Giant social justice book, which that is a category of books I love. So all of you who read Behind the Beautiful Forevers, right? You read that book and you loved it. It was so interesting. Poverty in Mumbai. Well, folks, try poverty in Milwaukee, because there is a lot for us to learn way, way closer to home. And Matthew Desmond does it brilliantly. I cannot recommend that strongly enough. So those are the events. Okay, this is the last question. Is it good? We'll see. Give it your best shot. Oh, yeah, that's a nice way to end. Okay, so I moved here the week before my 6th birthday. And I was gone from the time I was 17 until I was 30. I came home, I went on a date with a nice guy, and now I live here. And we will always, chances are, live here, no matter how much we talk about leaving our families here. I know that Nashville is changing, and it is in so many ways an entirely different city. And sometimes I will drive down a street that I haven't driven down in 2 years, and I think, oh my God, I'm lost. I don't know where I am. Who is that architect who is building exactly the same house all over this city? And can that person, you talk about me writing the same book over and over again. This person is building the same house every single place I go. And yet, there is something about Nashville that will always be the same. That's Percy and Edwin Warner Park. That's I always say it's the shrubbery, it's the undergrowth, it's the plant life, it's the humidity, it's the cicadas. It's that feeling that if we all just left for a month, none of this would be here when we got back. That the plant life and the bug life would just eat the whole city, and it would just be a grassy field when we got back. It's always pressing. Nature, no matter how overdeveloped we get, nature is just absolutely pressing in on Nashville all the time. And I love that. It's just a place that I feel like I understand so well. And it is a city that deeply cares about all things independent. If it's the music, if it's education, if it's bookstores or hardware stores or whatever. I mean, I just feel coffee shops, popsicles, I could go on and on. I just feel like the people in this city, no matter how they change, no matter how many new waves of people come in, that's sort of the ethos of the city, and people embrace it and keep it going. So, it's hard not to wish for it to stop. You want to pull up the gangplank and say, okay, California, go on home now. But that's what we are, and I think that we are very welcoming and very open, and we need some Syrians. That's what we need in Nashville now. So, okay, let me just tell you how this works, because I know you're not going home to buy your book from Amazon because I've scared you. All of the books that are here at the table, every single Patchett book that is here tonight, as well as these books, I have signed. So you have choices. You can just leave. Okay, that's a choice. You can buy a signed book and think that's enough, which they are first editions. So if you have any interest in that, a signed first edition in which I have not written Happy Birthday, Aunt Sally is ultimately a much more valuable book. If you would like me to write Happy Birthday, Aunt Sally, I will be sitting out there and I will be happy at the exact same pen to write whatever you want me to write above my name. If you would like me to write something above my name and you also want to get out of here, you can come to the bookstore, you can leave off a book, you can buy a book and leave it off there, and I will be home at least one day every week for the next 6 weeks. and we'll come in and do the personalizations. So those are all your choices. Guys, neighbors, friends, family, it's been such a pleasure to look around this room and see people that I know and I love. It gives me a lot of heart to take it out on the road, so thank you. I love you.